Hey everybody, we're here in the multiverse and the metaverse. We're gonna start talking. We're talking about metagaming, aren't we?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
All right.
And similar to the power gaming discussion we've had, let us define our term first and foremost. And I'm using the definition of metagaming as on its own, and not the one specified for D&D, but we can, with a slight caveat, we can specify it for D&D. Now, metagaming is any approach to a game that transcends or operates outside of the prescribed rules of the game, uses external factors to affect the game, or goes beyond the supposed limits or environment set by the game. Now, in D&D, we of course has to add the caveat that the rules of the game include the handling of character knowledge relative to player knowledge.
Cool. I dig it. I like that. My position in this one is actually going to be pretty simple. Metagaming is a neutral power. It is a tool, and it can be used to create good situations. It can be used to create bad situations. But I will ultimately go into what the core principle for making that determination actually is.
And I will try to further define what delineates good and bad metagaming.
Cool. All right. So I guess I'll give out the goods right off the bat. Like I said, metagaming is a tool. It's how it's used, not the fact that it exists is the problem. But I will tell you that the easiest way to determine whether or not your metagaming is being used properly is that in any given scene, if you are building tension, you are metagaming in a positive fashion. If you are subverting tension, you are metagaming in a negative factor.
Yeah. If we take a moment to look at the definition of the word cheat, as in to cheat, the definition is to act dishonestly or unfairly in order to gain an advantage.
When it comes
Yes.
to metagaming, I'm not terribly worried, like, because in general, when it comes to D&D, cheating is like the last on my list of things that matter. Um,
Yeah.
Kind of how we talked about in the power gaming, as the DM, I'm omnipotent. So your
Yes.
cheating can't actually give you any benefit over what I'm able to throw as challenges to you.
Yes. What I'm meaning when I'm talking about cheating, though, is when, for example, for example, if you throw out let's say you've created a ogre and it has higher stats in some way, shape, or form than a regular ogre, and one of the players goes, "Hey, that blow I just did should have killed him. An ogre only has so much health."
Yep. And so for that, I would point to my original point, which is that in this case, you are subverting tension in the scene because
Yes.
one, you're drawing attention away from the scene. You're actually arguing mechanisms, which is never good for a scene when you start arguing mechanisms that actively deflates it. And then the second one is depending on how boisterous the individual is talking about this said ogre stats, you are ruining tension for whether or not this creature is in a, like how much longer will this fight go. So if in the middle of the fight, this player in question, let's say they're using metagaming very poorly, and they're saying he's
Yeah.
only got 20 hit points left, you should be able to kill him on your turn with your two attacks. Oh, that we can see where
Yeah.
that would deflate and subvert the tension of the scene, right? So to me, I still think that it falls on that spectrum exactly, and I think your cheating point is good to kind of illustrate that.
Yes. Yes. Because as you pointed out, are you undercutting a tension or are you building tension? And it's one thing to have meta knowledge that say a usual ogre has so and so much health, but it's another entirely to try and utilize that in the game in a manner that impacts choices and the atmosphere and the mechanics. And even for one, you shouldn't be telling someone this thing has 20 health, you can kill it.
Mm-hmm.
What you maybe should do in that scenario is to, maybe your character says he's looking tired, see if you can finish it off.
Exactly, and that's the point: is that any meta knowledge can be used to make the scene better. So in this exact, we've described the exact same situation, the exact same number of knowledge, but the way that it was posed and used makes the scene better. You have this heroic moment. It's just all about how you use the tool.
Yeah. And just as prior with the discussion on power gaming, we come back to the distinction between hard and soft values. Hard values, just the numbers. Soft values, all the interpersonal elements that we have a hard time quantifying. And if you lose track of the soft skills and you use your knowledge, you are in many ways subverting tension and maybe even cheating in a sense in certain contexts, assuming you are using it to your advantage.
Yeah. Do you have any additional points for metagaming?
Well, there is, of course, I mentioned the distinction between character knowledge and player knowledge, and there is the question of sorry about that. Let's say you're playing a character that is a wizard. He has very high int and understanding and well, basically very high knowledge stats. And he sees the creature and he knows that from your description that say this is a basilisk and it can petrify you. And he immediately goes, I want to roll to see if I can figure out what this thing can do. That's one thing. If they want to say, but there's so many ways to word this that can move this from a sense of reducing tension to, because I mean, it makes sense that a very intelligent character would want to rack their brain about things and try and understand. It's another when they see, let's say it's a cockatrice and it doesn't look nearly as intimidating as a basilisk would, but it's still a monster. Would you have the same reaction?
Yeah, and that really comes down to what you're trying to build up for who your character is and what you're trying to do to the scene in particular. Mentioning wizards, I do have one aspect that I think is an interesting way that we've kind of dealt with and made metagaming into a huge boon for wizard-like characters or high intelligence characters at my table. So playing a high charisma character is difficult sometimes. It's difficult to kind of put that into action of what that looks like. But some people are at the table, and considering that the entire method of play is via communication, there are some people that are what I believe charismatic enough to actually like play like a charisma 16, 18, 20 character, and it feels believable, right? The high strength characters, they don't really have to actually exhibit strength at the table, so they get creative process to like exhibit their strengths. So doing that at the table is not that difficult either, because you just communicate in a creative way using strength, right? So that seems easy. What I've always found is that intelligence characters, somebody who has 18, 20 intelligence, these are very difficult for people to have, because as much as we like to think that, individuals are intelligent, like for me, I can't even fathom the intelligence it would be to be an 18 or 20. That's like beyond Sherlock Holmes level of intelligence. Like we're talking about
anyone, and we're talking about real world here, but anyone with an actual score of, let's say, 15 int will clearly be able to tell when a player with 12 int is trying to play 17 int.
Yeah. So ultimately, the problem that comes into is like, okay, so how do you play super intelligent characters? And the way that we've kind of dealt with it at the table is metagaming, where I try to tell my players, it's like, hey, when you guys have discussions out of character about a situation, or like especially like riddles are like the most common way that this shows up when everybody's trying to participate. I want everybody to participate, even the barbarian with a 7 intelligence. I want that player to participate in doing the puzzle. We don't need to sit there and role play the entire actively doing the puzzle in character, right? We can take 5-10 minutes out of character to try just everybody at the table to figure out what the puzzle is. And to me, that's the best representation of what an 18 or higher intelligence looks like, is actually 5 minds working together. So when it comes to it, everybody at the table is like, okay, this is what the puzzle says. I think this is what, and then everybody's back and forth. But when it comes to actually like role playing it out, hand it to the wizard. The wizard's the one who figures it out. Everybody got their cookies because they got to participate in solving the riddle. And it might have been, and that allows super intelligent and tactical characters to play barbarians or fighters that have lower intelligence without feeling like they're bringing the rest of the party down. Because it's like, well, I can't participate even though I know the answer to that. No, no, no. Hand the answer over to the wizard, because it would make sense that they would have the intelligence of 5 people. So when they role play it, we've all got our fun of solving the puzzle, but now when we role play it, it's in character. The character was the one who does it. And that might seem a little empty for people, but for us, man, that makes it releases a lot of that tension for when we're just solving puzzles or doing investigation and all this stuff. It releases that tension of feeling like like it has to be the wizard's the one who solves it. Then
it solves the sense of, shall we call it, exclusion, when when there's something that isn't when there's a problem ahead of you and and your skill set has nothing to do with it.
Yep. And I think that would also work with. I think you could do that with charisma. Somebody who's maybe a little bit more charismatic at the table might say, like, this is a line that you could use. You have to have a lot of trust in your group, and all the players have to kind of understand that nobody's trying to undercut or subvert anybody. That it's all in a place of love and making the scene more interesting. And then but I think it works best with intelligence because it really does fall into like riddles and puzzles, which don't have a lot of acting required.
Wisdom is also another interesting example, but that's largely because it includes things like history rolls and such.
Yeah, so when it comes to like knowing something or like reading like intention in people, so the wisdom and then the knowledge base and the intelligence, a lot of that you're actually metagaming because you're using the DM as information. Like but it's almost like in a reverse. Like the player has no idea, but the character has it. So it's like reverse. So you're handing, it's like your character would know this. And so you're handing it to the player. But you are using outside the normal bounds. The DM is not within your character's strengths and all this.
Yeah. This should most of the time be kind of a one-way street. If you're trying to hand knowledge, I mean, it's one thing to hand suggestions for like, I'd like my character background to include these elements, or if this character from my background or whatever it might be had this thing about them. That's one thing, but mechanical elements is not something that you should be handing to the GM.
Yeah.
Beyond just your sheet.
Yeah. I think obviously there's always certain lines that can be crossed.
Absolute.
Yeah, of course.
Everything's something, of course. But as a general rule, you need to know the rules before you can safely break them.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. What are the points you got from metagaming?
Let's see.
Because I think I'm plumb out, man. I think metagaming's the bee's knees. It just needs to be used delicately.
We could talk about how people misunderstand metagaming and blame any. There are those who, when you talk about metagaming, they are absolutists on it, that no metagaming at all, never. If you touch anything that your character wouldn't have touched, if you know anything that your character wouldn't have known, then that's somehow a cardinal sin.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever ran into the person. Like, I've heard of this hypothetical person. I don't know. I guess the way that I would deal with it is just straight up just tell them, be like, hey man, there's ways to use metagaming and make your game better. So it's not inherently bad. Maybe we relax a little bit, check it out.
Yeah, I feel that's a fair way to point it out, because what we've been doing here is to nuance the concept, because a lot of the time it is used pejoratively.
Yes.
The concept of metagaming, that is essentially where you hear the term.
That's exclusively how I've heard it for basically all of my gaming career.
Yeah, people don't talk about when it comes to D&D, people don't talk about the meta as in terms of how you interact with the group and how you make that elements, the soft skill questions work out using the meta. You only hear about people who misuse it in hard skill and hard value areas.
Are you saying that people on the internet don't talk about or like watching when people agree or have a good time?
Should I say no to this? just just to keep the discussion going.
I agree. So, yes,
Yeah.
I think that's completely true. That it is difficult for people to find recounts of like people talking about when metagaming was pretty sick at the table, where you're like, wow, that was really good. You probably didn't even
Yeah.
notice it. That's how good it was. It probably just rolled with the punches because it didn't
Yeah.
clink your gears in the middle of session where you're like, what?
We don't think of social interaction in terms of metagaming, even when we are dealing with D&D. We only think of metagaming as something that throws a wrench into social interaction.
Yeah,
Like
the
if
example
you
that's always given is the troll, right? That's the
yeah,
always the example for metagaming that's given. And to me, it's like, well, you could use that exact situation and make it interesting with
yeah,
using that meta knowledge. But
yeah. Like if you know that another player at the table, and I'm talking the player, not the character, is having a bad time. Well, has been having a bad time in general. They're not in a good place mentally or so. There's nothing wrong with adjusting the way you treat that character a bit, just to because and of course there's limits and bounds to everything, but there's nothing wrong with doing that a bit because you're all here to have fun, and
mhm,
it's worth putting it. It's worth not having being absolutist on the rules just to make sure that we are all actually having fun.
yeah, yeah. You got any other points?
No, I think that's a good ending.
All right. At the end of the day, I think we all need to use a little bit more metagaming in our lives when we come to our gaming lives, but it also needs to be used with a soft hand and some discretion. Just like all the other tools that we have when it comes to social interaction and dealing with people, there's no silver bullet, but metagaming can be a huge boon to your table and make your games better if used appropriately.
Indeed.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys later.